Dear Excellencies and dear Chair, while I'm thankful for the opportunity to speak to you today, I recognize that what has been shared before me and has been said over and over again in this very chamber by so many other advocates, humanitarians, and authorities who have come before you in the last 454 days is already so damning and both morally and legally sufficient to merit a response. In the words of my friend and female Gazan surgeon, Dr. Sara As-Saqqa, who I spoke to this morning, she says, "I don't know what one can say or write honestly. Last time I was asked this question, I felt like screaming in the face of the whole world and telling them, what are you waiting for? You've seen it and you've heard it all." I will attempt in the next few minutes I have with you today not to describe the systematic and intentional attacks on healthcare in Gaza, because that would take far more time than the amount of time I have with you and has also been summarized by those who spoke before me and extensively documented by bodies of the United Nations itself. Instead, I would like to share with you the perspectives of healthcare workers in Gaza who've been sending SOS messages to this council for over a year and who, if still alive today, are at the front lines, setting an example for all of us of what it means to practice what you preach. I've had the privilege of teaching in Gaza's medical schools and hospitals and getting to know these healthcare workers over many years. Despite being under siege, they were astoundingly able to build an extensive healthcare system, provide high-quality medical care to patients, and nurture excellent medical education for the growing generation of doctors. They are proud, hardworking professionals who take their oath to care for their patients very seriously. Dr. Hammam al-Loh, when asked why he hadn't left the hospitals when they were besieged, responded, "Who would care for my patients? You think I went to medical school and for my postgraduate degrees for a total of 14 years, so I think about my life and not my patients?" Dr. Al-Loh was killed by an Israeli airstrike on November 12th, 2023, at the age of 36 years. Since October of last year, healthcare workers have become a clear target of Israel's military violence. Our colleagues and friends have been killed, maimed, unlawfully detained, and tortured. Over 1,000 healthcare workers have been killed in Gaza in the past 15 months. Hundreds of healthcare workers have been held in Israeli captivity. At least 4 have been killed while in detention. They tell us that they are targets because they're healthcare workers, that wearing scrubs and white coats is like wearing a target on their backs. Why, I asked, and you may be asking. It's because hospitals and healthcare workers represent life and a will to keep people alive. In May of last year, after Dr. Adnan al-Bursh, chief of orthopedics at Al-Shifa Hospital, was killed in Israeli detention after months of torture, a surgeon who knew him well sent us this message. "Practicing medicine has become a crime," he said, "and the penalty for saving people's lives has become detention and being tortured to death." I messaged colleagues in Gaza last night to ask what they would like me to say to the chamber today. Here are some of their messages. The savagery continues to get worse. The crimes are beyond brutal, and the world continues to watch. No one is stopping Israel. They do whatever they want without any consequences. There's no such thing as international law, or the law only applies to certain parts of the world and not to us. Double standards, as they say. After 15 months of brutality, it's now clear that our blood is cheap and we're just numbers to the world. End quote. Dr. Khamis Al-Assi, a Palestinian pain and rehabilitation doctor in Gaza and a dear friend and fellow Oxford graduate, wrote to me this morning saying, "Yesterday I was working in the emergency department when I was shocked to find my nephews brought in. One was martyred and the other was severely injured. We are devastated. This is my message. Stop the war. Enough is enough." End quote. My colleague, Dr. Sara As-Saqqa, who I quoted earlier, and incidentally, who herself works for the UN Office for Coordination of Humanitarian Affairs in Gaza, said, "I never thought that international law or human rights institutions would allow this. For 2 million people to be locked in a cage and systematically massacred, Imagine being sick or injured and knowing that the cure is available, but not being able to access it because the crossings are closed. There is no greater injustice. The final set of messages I want to share come from Dr. Hussam Abu Safiyyeh, who my colleague from the WHO just spoke about, the medical director of Kamal Adwan Hospital and a pediatrician like myself. On November 3rd, he wrote, "We urgently need increased pressure on the international community to help the healthcare system perform its duties in accordance with established humanitarian laws. We're not asking for anything beyond this. We are here to provide a humanitarian service to our people, the injured, and those of need of assistance, and we wish to continue doing our job." He then, on December 3rd, after repeated SOS calls in between, said, "Today, for the 5th time, Kamal Adwan Hospital has been targeted in a horrifying, relentless manner. Drones are dropping bombs filled with shrapnel that injure anyone who dares to move. Once again, the occupation is focusing its aggression on medical teams. We are exhausted by the ongoing violence. Why are we subjected to such brutality? Each day, the hospital is systematically targeted." End quote. And what happened next after that? After the Israeli military raided the hospital, people were blindfolded and undressed. Patients on crutches were put on the ground as Israeli soldiers took celebratory pictures with the surviving healthcare workers in humiliating positions. The hospital was burned down, and Dr. Abu Safiyyeh was taken, we believe, along with many colleagues. I speak to you today, like so many healthcare workers and citizens around the world, filled with grief, with anger, with frustration, and frankly, with disbelief. Disbelief that all of our repeated firsthand and utterly damning testimonies have still not moved the world to meaningful action. Disbelief that the countless addresses to the media and even here at the United Nations just 5 weeks ago, we're still here trying to convince anyone who will listen that this needs to stop. Disbelief that all previous propositions to end violence have been obstructed by the very body whose primary responsibility is supposedly to maintain international peace and security. In disbelief that on November 20th, the United States and my country of citizenship again vetoed a UN Security draft resolution that demanded an immediate and unconditional ceasefire in Gaza, despite 14 votes in favor. In disbelief that it has been one entire year this month since the International Court of Justice issued provisional measures after ruling that Israel's acts could amount to plausible genocide. And that since Amnesty International and Human Rights Watch, amongst other organizations, have concluded that Israel's actions are consistent with genocide. In disbelief that we are still here after we have driven 96% of Gaza's children to believe their death is imminent, while many wish for their own death. And after 7 infants, as of yesterday, have died from hypothermia in the past week, meaning they literally froze to their death. In disbelief that we are still here when Israel's military violence has created the largest cohort of pediatric amputees in known history, largest cohort of journalists killed, the largest cohort of UN workers killed. And I shudder to even estimate the number of children who've lost their parents and have been orphaned for life. In disbelief that Israel has killed another 90 Palestinians in Gaza, at least in the short time since I got the call last night requesting that I address you here today. We are pleading to the world, to the people and the states that make up this very body, to show us that international humanitarian law matters, that human rights are universally applied, and to stay true to the very reason that this body was created. Thank you.